Hello and welcome to the first in a new series of strange stories from around the world. Tonight's tale links to a story that I'm sure you're all extremely familiar with. Picture the scene. It is well over 100 years ago in the port of Southampton, and a great ship is waiting to set sail on her maiden voyage. This ship is the biggest, grandest, most luxurious ship ever built, an absolute marvel of her age, the last word in luxury, and she is said to be absolutely unsinkable. And she sets sail to great press fanfare with some of the wealthiest people, most famous people of the age on board. But she never reaches her destination. Halfway across the Atlantic, she tragically hits an iceberg and sinks with catastrophic loss of life. The year is 1898. Now, I'm sure you're thinking, hang on, that can't be right. Surely we're talking about the Titanic, aren't we? The Titanic sank in 1912. But you would be wrong. This ship exists only on paper. She was the creation of a novelist called Morgan Robertson. Her name was The Titan, and the name of the book, the name of the novel, was Futility. It was published in 1898, a full 14 years before the Titanic disaster. And yet, in so many ways, it appears to have been almost a premonition of that disaster, apart from the similarity of the names. So the ship in Robertson's novel was called the Titan. Of course, the real ship was the Titanic. And they were near duplicates of one another in many other ways as well. They were roughly the same size, had more or less the same speed, the same carrying capacity. Both were said to be unsinkable, and both sank in exactly the same spot in the North Atlantic. And the strange coincidences don't end there either. The famous journalist W.T. Stead published in 1892 another short story which proved to be another uncanny preview of the Titanic disaster. Stead was a spiritualist, and he was also one of the more than 1,500 people who died when the Titanic went down. Was that a premonition of his own death? Neither Robertson's horror novel nor Stead's prophetic story served as a warning, of course, to Titanic's captain in 1912. It didn't prevent the tragedy from happening. And indeed, both stories, and particularly Futility, were quite obscure until after the disaster. There was understandably a surge of interest in the book after the Titanic disaster had happened. Now, of course, we could chalk it all up to coincidence, but it seems a very strange coincidence that so many of the details were so accurately foreshadowed, both by Robertson's book and indeed by Stead's short story as well. So a lot of people believed that there's something more to this. Whatever the truth of that, a backwards recollection of both the real disaster and the fictional disasters did save another ship some 23 years later. In another story which contains some very eerie and even terrifying coincidences. So the year is now 1935. The month is April, which of course is the same month as the Titanic disaster, and also the month of the disaster in Robertson's novel as well. A young seaman called William Reeves was standing watch on a small tramp steamer vessel, a ship which had left Tyneside with a cargo of coal, I believe, headed for Canada. Young Reeves had been brooding very deeply on both the Titanic disaster and the fictional story, so he knew about Robertson's novel, and he knew about the strange coincidences, the apparent premonition of the disaster. And it was something that actually touched him personally, because he had actually been born on the very day that the Titanic sank, April the 14th, 1912. So young Robertson, now 23 years of age, had been thinking in the past few days very deeply about the disaster and the apparent coincidences between the real and the fictional disaster. And these thoughts were playing on his mind this dark night as he's kind of straining to see ahead in the fog. You can imagine his tired, bloodshot eyes straining ahead for any sign of danger. Nothing to be seen. There's nothing but a horizonless, impenetrable gloom. But suddenly he got this feeling, this strong feeling of impending disaster, impending doom. And he wanted to shout an alarm. But he was obviously at the same time he was scared too. He was scared of ridicule. But the feeling of doom was so overwhelming that he kind of flared into a panic-stricken certainty, and he shouted out a danger warning. The helmsman rang out the signal, engines full astern, the ship churned to a halt. It had stopped just yards from a huge iceberg that towered menacingly out of the blackness of the night. And that was not the end of the encounter, because more icebergs crowded in, surrounding the ship, and it took 9 days for icebreakers to smash away clear and release the ship from the icy prison that it had found itself in. But at least Reeves' sudden premonition had warning just in the nick of time in order to save the ship from certain doom. Now again, perhaps we could put all of this down to coincidence, but it was, once again, one hell of a coincidence. And there was one other coincidence as well. The name of the tramp steamer, which had come so close to sharing the Titanic's fate, was called the Titanian. I hope you enjoyed this true story. More to come in the near future.